Chapter 1. The Blood Auction. The rain had turned the cobblestones into mirrors, each one reflecting the gaslights that lined Marlow Street like dying stars. Alara Thorne pulled her cloak tighter, her boots splashing through puddles that smelled of rust and old secrets. She shouldn't have been out this late, not in this part of the city, where the shop signs were written in languages that predated the Empire, where doorways led to establishments that didn't advertise their services to mortals. But desperation made fools of everyone. 3 months ago she'd had a home, a modest townhouse her grandmother left her, filled with books and dried herbs and the kind of quiet that felt like safety. Then came the solicitors, the creditors, the men in pressed suits who explained with apologetic smiles that never touched their eyes that her grandmother's debts had transferred to her, debts Alara hadn't known existed, debts to people whose names were whispered, never spoken aloud. The House of Nocturne. She'd laughed at first. Vampires were folklore, ghost stories mothers told to keep children from wandering after dark, but the laughter died when the first letter arrived, written in ink that seemed to absorb light rather than reflect it. The message was simple: pay what is owed, or become payment yourself. Tonight was her last chance. A stranger at the market, a woman with silver hair and eyes too bright to be entirely human, had told her about the blood auction, a place where mortals could sell years of their lives, drops of their blood, pieces of their future, in exchange for coin. Enough coin to buy her freedom. The address led to a warehouse that loomed against the stormy sky like a sleeping beast. No sign marked the entrance, just a door of black iron with a symbol etched into its surface, a crescent moon pierced by a sword. Alara's hand trembled as she reached for the handle. It opened before she could touch it. "You're late," said a voice like smoke and broken glass. The man who stood in the doorway was tall, impossibly so, dressed in a coat that belonged to another century. His skin was pale as parchment, his dark hair tied back with a ribbon that might have been silk or shadow. But it was his eyes that stopped her breath, ice blue, ancient and utterly devoid of warmth. I was told this was where. I know what you were told." He stepped aside, gesturing into the darkness beyond. "The auction has already begun. If you wish to participate, you'll need to move quickly." Alara hesitated. Every instinct screamed at her to run, to flee back into the rain and find another way. But there was no other way. There never had been. She stepped inside. The warehouse interior defied its exterior. Vaulted ceilings soared overhead, supported by columns of dark marble veined with gold. Chandeliers hung like frozen waterfalls, their candles burning with flames that cast no shadows. Perhaps 50 people filled the space, some mortal pale and nervous like herself, others clearly not. Those others moved with a grace that suggested their bones were made of different materials, their eyes reflecting the candlelight like those of cats. Vampires. Real. Undeniable. Standing mere feet away. First time? The tall man had followed her inside, his footsteps making no sound on the polished floor. Alara nodded, not trusting her voice. "The rules are simple," he continued, his tone suggesting he'd given this speech 1,000 times and found it tedious. "Mortals offer what they're willing to sell. Houses bid. Transactions are binding for 7 years, enforced by blood oath. Violation means death for both parties. Do you understand?" Yes. "I think so. Thinking isn't sufficient." His eyes narrowed. "You come here selling pieces of your life to creatures who've forgotten what mortality tastes like. If you don't understand the terms, you'll end up bound to something far worse than debt." "I don't have a choice." Something flickered across his face, recognition, perhaps, or pity. It vanished as quickly as it appeared. Everyone has a choice, most simply lack the courage to make it. Before she could respond, a gong sounded deep, resonant, felt in the bones rather than heard. The murmur of conversation died instantly. At the far end of the warehouse, a woman ascended a dais of black stone. She wore crimson silk that moved like liquid, and her presence commanded the room with the weight of centuries. "The auction of tides begins," she announced. "Let those who would bargain with eternity step forward." Alara's feet moved before her mind could catch up. She found herself in a line of mortals, each one trembling or defiant or resigned. The first was a young man who offered 5 years of his life for enough gold to save his sister from consumption. A house representative, a vampire woman in emerald velvet bid and won. The second, a woman offering her blood once monthly for 3 years. Another bid, another binding. Then it was Alara's turn. She climbed the dais on legs that felt like water. The assembled vampires watched her with expressions ranging from boredom to hunger. She forced herself to meet their gazes. "I offer." Her voice cracked. She cleared her throat, tried again. "I offer 10 years of monthly blood draws and service to whichever house will settle my grandmother's debt to the House of Nocturne." Silence fell like a shroud. The woman in crimson leaned forward, interest sharpening her features. "Did you say the House of Nocturne?" "Yes." Whispers erupted. Vampires turned to one another, their conversations too fast and low for Alara to follow. She stood frozen, confusion and fear warring in her chest. What had she said wrong? No house will bid on this. The declaration came from the tall man who'd greeted her at the door. He'd moved to stand at the edge of the dais, his expression unreadable. "The girl doesn't know what she's offering." "Then perhaps," said a new voice, "someone should educate her." The crowd parted. A man emerged from the shadows at the back of the warehouse, shadows that seemed to cling to him like loyal servants. He was younger looking than most of the vampires present, perhaps 30 in appearance, with sharp cheekbones and dark hair that fell across his forehead. He wore black from collar to boots and moved with the lethal grace of a drawn blade, but it was his eyes that held her captive. Gray as storm clouds, burning with an intelligence that felt like being dissected and catalogued and understood all at once. "Cassian Nocturne," someone breathed. The name hit Alara like a physical blow. Nocturne. The house she owed. The house that had destroyed her life with a debt she'd never agreed to carry. He stopped at the base of the dais, tilting his head to study her. "You offer yourself to settle a debt to my house, mortal. Do you even know what your grandmother borrowed?" Alara's hands clenched into fists. "No. The letters never specified. She borrowed time." His smile was knife-thin. 20 years of extended life, purchased through blood magic. When she died before repaying it, the debt transferred to her heir, to you. "That's not, I never agreed. Blood debts don't require agreement. They require blood." He ascended the dais in 3 fluid strides, stopping close enough that she could see the inhuman stillness of his chest, the way his skin seemed to drink in the candlelight. "But I am not without mercy. I'll accept your offer, Alara Thorne. 10 years of service. Your blood, your time, your obedience. In exchange, your debt is settled. And if I refuse, then the debt remains, growing with interest until it consumes everything you are and everything you might become." His eyes bored into hers. "Choose quickly. My patience, unlike my existence, is not infinite." Alara's mind raced. 10 years. A decade of her life, bound to this creature, to his house, to a world she didn't understand. But what choice did she have? Prison? Death? A life spent running from debts that would always find her? She thought of her grandmother's house, already lost. Of the future she'd imagined, already ashes. "I accept," she whispered. Cassian Nocturne smiled. It wasn't a kind expression. "Then let the binding begin." Chapter 2, The Binding. The woman in crimson produced a silver knife from the folds of her gown. Its blade caught the candlelight, throwing sharp reflections across the assembled faces. Alara's breath came shallow as the woman approached, her movements ritualistic, practiced. "Blood binds what words cannot break," the woman intoned. "Offer your hand, mortal." Alara extended her right hand, willing it not to shake. The woman's fingers were ice cold as they gripped her wrist, turning her palm upward. The knife's edge kissed her skin, a bright line of pain, and then blood welled, dark against her pale flesh. Cassian stepped forward without hesitation. He offered his own hand, and the woman cut him with the same blade. His blood was darker than Alara's, almost black in the uncertain light, and it moved differently. Slower, thicker, as though reluctant to leave his veins. "Speak the terms," the woman commanded. Cassian's eyes never left Alara's face. 10 years of service. Your blood given freely once each full moon. Your presence in my house when I require it. Your obedience in matters concerning House Nocturne and its enemies. His voice dropped lower. In exchange, all debts held against you by House Nocturne are hereby satisfied. And my freedom after 10 years? A muscle twitched in his jaw. Guaranteed, witnessed by the auction court. The woman pressed their bleeding palms together. The moment their blood touched, Alara gasped. Heat seared through her hand, racing up her arm and into her chest. She tried to pull away, but Cassian's grip was iron. The pain intensified, burning, reshaping something fundamental inside her. Then it was over. She stumbled backward, cradling her hand. The cut had vanished, leaving only a thin silver scar in the shape of a crescent moon. Cassian examined his own palm, where an identical mark gleamed. It's done, the woman announced. The bond is sealed. May both parties honor their oaths or face the court's justice. The crowd began to disperse, the auction continuing with other desperate mortals and hungry houses, but Alara barely noticed. The scar on her palm pulsed with a strange warmth, and beneath it, she could feel something new, a thread. Gossamer thin, connecting her to the man standing before her. Come, Cassian said. We leave now. Leave? But I need to collect my things, settle my... You have nothing left to settle. Your possessions will be retrieved and brought to House Nocturne. He turned toward the exit, clearly expecting her to follow. Your old life ended the moment you walk through that door. Anger flared, momentarily overwhelming her fear. You can't just... I'm not cattle to be herded. He stopped. Turned. When he looked at her, something dangerous glinted in those storm-gray eyes. No. You're worse. You're a mortal bound to the house that every other faction in this city wants destroyed, which means, Alara Thorne, that you've just become the most valuable and vulnerable piece on a board you don't even know exists. Before she could respond, the warehouse doors exploded inward. Splinters of iron shrieked through the air. Vampires scattered, some moving to shield the mortals, others drawing weapons that seemed to materialize from shadow itself. Alara stood frozen as figures poured through the ruined entrance, vampires dressed in silver and white, their eyes burning with cold fury. House Solis, someone hissed. The tall man who'd first greeted Alara, she still didn't know his name, appeared at Cassian's side, a curved blade already in his hand. They violated the auction truce. So I see, Marcus. Cassian's voice was terrifyingly calm. How unfortunate for them. A woman stepped through the wreckage, flanked by a dozen warriors. She wore armor of articulated silver that seemed to pulse with its own light. Her hair was white gold, her features beautiful in the way of ancient statues, perfect and utterly lifeless. Cassian Nocturne, she called out. You've grown bold, attending public gatherings. Have you forgotten that your house is marked for extinction? I forget nothing, Seraphine. Unlike your house, mine has memory that extends beyond petty grudges. Seraphine's smile was razor-sharp. Petty? Your father killed my brother. Your brother tried to overthrow the Council of Night. My father administered justice. He administered murder. Her gaze shifted to Alara, and something hungry entered her expression. And now you've bound yourself to a mortal. How sentimental. Perhaps I should take her as compensation for my loss. Cassian moved faster than Alara's eyes could track. One moment he stood several feet away. The next, he was directly in front of her, his body a shield between her and Seraphine. Touch her, and I'll give you a death your house will spend centuries mourning. The temperature in the warehouse plummeted. Alara's breath misted in the air. Around them, vampires from both houses took defensive positions, weapons drawn, the promise of violence thick as smoke. Seraphine laughed a sound like breaking ice. So protective already, the bond must be fresh. She gestured to her warriors. Stand down. I didn't come here to start a war tonight. But Cassian. Her eyes glittered with malice. Your house's time is running out. The Council of Night grows weary of your father's transgressions. When they move against House Nocturne, I'll be there to watch it fall." She turned and swept from the warehouse, her entourage following. The tension didn't ease until the last of them had vanished into the rain-soaked night. Marcus sheathed his blade with a hiss of steel. That was a warning. They're planning something. They're always planning something. Cassian's shoulders remained rigid, his attention still fixed on the ruined doorway. "But she's right about one thing. I've made you a target, Alara Thorne." Alara found her voice, though it emerged shakier than sheet of light. "What did she mean about your house being marked for extinction?" "It means," he said quietly, finally turning to face her, "that my family is at war with half the vampire houses in this city. It means that binding yourself to me may have been the worst decision of your very short mortal life." His expression softened, just a fraction. "I'm sorry. If I'd known Seraphine was watching the auction, I would have handled this differently. Would you have let me go?" He was silent for a long moment. "No. The debt was real, but I would have prepared you better for what's coming." The woman in crimson reappeared, her earlier poise shattered. "Lord Nocturne, you must leave. The auction court cannot guarantee your safety after such a violation." Cassian nodded once. Then he looked at Alara, and she saw something unexpected in his ancient eyes: regret, perhaps, or reluctant responsibility. "Come," he said, gentler this time. "Welcome to House Nocturne. Try not to die on your first night." He held out his unmarked hand. After a moment's hesitation, Alara took it. Together, they walked into the storm. Chapter 3. The House of Shadows. The carriage that waited outside the warehouse was a relic from another age, black lacquered wood, with curtains of midnight velvet, drawn by horses whose eyes reflected red in the gaslight. Alara climbed inside, her wet cloak clinging to her shoulders, and found the interior lined with crushed silk the color of dried blood. Cassian entered after her, folding his tall frame into the opposite seat with unnatural grace. Marcus, the man with the curved blade, took position beside the driver. The carriage lurched forward without command, the horses knowing their way home. For several minutes, neither of them spoke. Alara watched the city blur past through a gap in the curtains, familiar streets made strange by darkness and fear. Her hand throbbed where the silver scar marked her palm, a constant reminder of what she'd become. Bound, owned, trapped. "You're afraid," Cassian observed. "Wouldn't you be?" She met his gaze, refusing to look away, despite the predatory stillness in his stare. "I've just sold myself to a vampire whose house is apparently doomed, who's been threatened by armored warriors, and who treats me like property he's annoyed to have acquired." Something flickered in his expression, surprise perhaps. "You have courage. That's good. You'll need it." "What I need are answers." Alara leaned forward. "What's the Council of Night? Why does House Solus want you dead? And what exactly does service mean in the terms I just agreed to?" Cassian was quiet, his fingers drumming a slow pattern on the seat beside him. When he finally spoke, his voice carried the weight of centuries. "The Council of Night governs all vampire houses in this territory, 7 ancient bloodlines, each with their own domain, their own power. House Nocturne is one of them. Or was, before my father made certain choices." "What choices?" "He enforced laws that other houses found inconvenient. Laws about consent, about feeding, about how mortals should be treated." His lip curled. "Vampires are predators, Alara. Most prefer their prey frightened and powerless. My father believed we could be more than our hunger." "Believed?" Past tense. "He's been missing for 3 months. The admission seemed to cost him. House Solus claims he fled to avoid justice for murdering Seraphine's brother, but her brother was executed legally after trial. My father didn't run. He wouldn't. Then where is he? If I knew that, we wouldn't be at war." The carriage turned onto a narrow street lined with iron gates and high stone walls. Alara glimpsed gardens gone wild, statues covered in ivy, the forgotten elegance of old money and older magic. The horses slowed before a massive gate wrought in the shape of intertwined thorns. It opened soundlessly as they approached. House Nocturne rose before them like a Gothic dream made solid. 3 stories of dark stone and darker windows, towers at each corner reaching toward the cloud-thick sky. Gargoyles perched along the roofline, their faces worn smooth by centuries of rain. Despite its grandeur, the house felt empty. No lights burned in the windows, no servants waited at the entrance. "It's just us," Cassian said, following her gaze. "Most of our household staff fled when the other houses began circling. Can't blame them. Loyalty has its limits when faced with annihilation." The carriage stopped. Marcus opened the door, his expression grim. "I'll patrol the grounds. Seraphine's theatrics tonight felt like distraction." "Agreed." Cassian descended, then offered Alara his hand. She ignored it, climbing down on her own. His mouth twitched amusement or irritation, she couldn't tell. The interior of House Nocturne matched its exterior, vast, shadowed, beautiful in its decay. Marble floors stretched beneath chandeliers thick with dust. Portraits lined the walls, pale faces watching from gilded frames. Alara caught glimpses of Cassian's features repeated across generations. The same sharp cheekbones, the same intelligent eyes. "Your room is on the 2nd floor," he said, leading her toward a grand staircase. "East wing. You'll have privacy there." "And you?" "West wing, far enough that you needn't worry about unwanted visits." He paused at the base of the stairs. "Despite what you may believe, I don't make a habit of terrorizing the mortals in my care. Just binding them to decade-long contracts? You came to me, remember? I simply accepted what you offered." Anger flared again, hot and cleansing. "You know I had no choice. You leveraged my desperation." "Yes." He turned to face her fully, and for the first time she saw something raw beneath his controlled exterior. "I did. Because if another house had claimed your debt, you'd be dead or mindless by now. At least here you have a chance." "A chance at what?" "Survival. Perhaps more if you're clever." He gestured up the stairs. "Your room is the 3rd door on the left. You'll find clothes, books, whatever you need. The kitchen is stocked. I don't eat, but Marcus does, and he'll show you where things are tomorrow." "Tomorrow? What happens tonight?" "Tonight you rest. Tomorrow you begin learning what it means to serve House Nocturne." His gaze held hers. "And what it means to be hunted by every other house in the city." He started to turn away, but Alara's voice stopped him. "Why did you really accept my offer? You could have let me fail, let the debt consume me. Why bind yourself to a mortal you don't know, during a war you're already losing?" Cassian was silent for so long she thought he wouldn't answer. When he did, his words were barely audible. "Because my father would have. And until I know he's truly gone, I have to be the man he raised me to be, even if it kills us both." He walked away then, disappearing into the shadows that seemed to welcome him home. Alara stood alone in the cavernous entry hall, listening to the house settle around her creaks and whispers. The sound of centuries breathing. She climbed the stairs slowly, each step taking her deeper into a world she didn't understand. The 3rd door on the left opened to reveal a room of surprising warmth, a 4-poster bed with burgundy linens, a fireplace already burning. Windows overlooking gardens silver with moonlight. On the desk sat a single book, leather-bound and ancient. Alara opened it carefully. "A Mortal's Guide to Vampire Houses," read the title page, written in elegant script. "Please read. Your life may depend on it." Cien. She sat down and began to read, the fire crackling softly, the night pressing close against the windows. Outside something howled, distant and hungry. Chapter 4. Lessons in Blood. Alara woke to silence so complete it felt unnatural. No birdsong, no distant traffic, no sounds of a city stirring to life. For a disoriented moment, she couldn't remember where she was. Then the events of the previous night crashed back: the auction, the binding, the attack. House Nocturne. She sat up, wincing at the stiffness in her shoulders. The fire had died to embers, and gray dawn light filtered through the heavy curtains. The book she'd been reading lay open on the bed beside her, its pages filled with information both fascinating and terrifying. Vampire houses operated under strict hierarchies. blood oaths were unbreakable. Feeding required explicit consent, or the vampire risked madness. And most troubling wars between houses rarely ended without one faction's complete annihilation. A soft knock interrupted her thoughts. "Miss Thorne?" Marcus's voice muffled by the door. "Lord Nocturne requests your presence in the library." Alara found clothes laid out on a chair, simple but well made, a white blouse and dark skirt that fit her perfectly. She dressed quickly, splashed water on her face from a porcelain basin, and tried to tame her sleep-tangled hair. The silver scar on her palm caught the light, still warm to the touch. Marcus waited in the hallway, looking far less intimidating in daylight. His features were kind beneath the warrior's bearing, his eyes a softer brown than she'd realized. "Did you sleep?" she asked as they walked. "Vampires don't sleep the way mortals do. We enter a kind of dormancy during daylight hours. Cassian fights it when necessary, but it costs him." Marcus led her down a corridor lined with more portraits. "He'll be weaker today. Irritable. Try not to provoke him." "I'll do my best." The library occupied the entire south wing. Floor-to-ceiling shelves groaned under the weight of thousands of books, scrolls, and manuscripts. Tall windows overlooked an overgrown garden where stone fountains stood dry and forgotten. Cassian sat at a massive oak table, surrounded by open volumes and scattered papers. He looked diminished in the daylight, still dangerous, still impossibly beautiful, but somehow less substantial. Dark circles shadowed his eyes, and his skin seemed almost translucent. "You're staring," he said without looking up. "You look terrible." A ghost of a smile touched his lips. Honesty. How refreshing. He gestured to the chair across from him. "Sit. We have much to discuss." Alara sat, her gaze drawn to the documents spread before him. Maps of the city, marked with symbols she didn't recognize. Lists of names, some crossed out in red ink. Letters written in languages that predated English. "I assume you read the book I left?" Cassian asked. "Most of it. The section on blood bonds was enlightening." "Then you understand that what binds us is more than contract. You can feel me now, can't you? A presence at the edge of your awareness." She wanted to deny it, but he was right. Ever since waking, she'd been conscious of something new, a subtle pull, like a compass needle seeking north. It pointed west, toward this very room. What does it mean? "It means I know if you're in danger, if you're afraid, if you're dying." His eyes met hers, unnervingly direct. "And you'll know the same of me. It's House Nocturne's particular magic. Our bonds run deeper than most. My father believed it made us stronger, more loyal to those we protected, or more vulnerable. That too." He pushed a sheet of paper toward her. "These are the houses aligned against us. Memorize them, their symbols, their territories, their methods." Alara scanned the list. House Solis, led by Seraphine. House Corvus, masters of shadow magic. House Sanguine, the oldest bloodline. 7 houses in total, each more powerful than the last. Why do they all want you destroyed? Because we represent change they fear. Most vampires view mortals as livestock useful for feeding, disposable when drained. House Nocturne argued for centuries that we could coexist differently, that consent and partnership made us stronger than predation. He leaned back, exhaustion evident in every line of his body. When my father disappeared, they saw their chance to eliminate the last house that constrained them. And if they succeed, then mortals in this city become prey. No laws, no protection, no mercy. His gaze hardened. "Which is why you need to learn to defend yourself." "I'm not a fighter." "You don't need to be a warrior, but you need to understand vampire weaknesses, how to move through our world without drawing attention, and how to survive if I'm not there to protect you." He stood, moving to one of the tall windows. The daylight seemed to pain him, but he didn't retreat. "Marcus will train you in practical matters. I'll teach you house politics and etiquette." "And the blood?" The question came out quieter than she intended. "When do you feed?" "The full moon, as agreed. 16 days from now." He didn't turn around. I won't lie to you, Alara. It will hurt the first time. Your body isn't accustomed to the exchange, but I give you my word. I'll take only what's needed, nothing more. How reassuring, she muttered. This time his laugh was genuine, if brief. You really don't fear me, do you? I'm terrified of you. I'm just more terrified of everything else. He turned then, studying her with something approaching respect. Good. Fear will keep you alive. But so will knowledge. He gestured to the books surrounding them. You have access to everything in this library. History, magic, vampire lore, it's all here. Learn quickly. Our enemies won't wait for you to catch up. A clock somewhere in the house chimed noon. Cassian flinched, his hand gripping the window frame. You should rest, Alara said, surprising herself with the concern in her voice. I should do many things. But he moved away from the window, the relief visible. Marcus will find you for training this afternoon. Until then, feel free to explore. Just stay within the grounds. The wards that protect this house won't extend beyond the gates. He walked past her toward the door, each step slower than the last. At the threshold, he paused. The book mentioned that blood bonds can be influenced by strong emotion, Alara said. Is that true? Yes. Fear, anger, pain, they all transmit through the connection. Strong enough feelings can even compel the bonded to seek each other out. His back remained to her. Why do you ask? Because I felt you last night. After Seraphine left, you were. She hesitated. Afraid isn't the right word, but something close. Silence stretched between them. When Cassian finally spoke, his voice was barely audible. Grief. What you felt was grief. He left without another word, disappearing into the shadowed hallways of his dying house. Alara sat alone in the library, surrounded by centuries of knowledge, feeling the faint pull of the bond connecting her to a man who was already half-ghost. Outside, storm clouds gathered. Chapter 5. The first lesson. Marcus found her in the garden 3 hours later, standing before a fountain where stone angels wept into a basin choked with leaves. She'd spent the intervening time exploring the library, reading about vampire physiology and the intricate web of alliances that had once held the houses in careful balance, until House Nocturne upset that balance by insisting monsters could choose to be something more. Ready? Marcus asked, carrying 2 wooden staffs. For what, exactly? Survival training. Come. He led her to a circular courtyard hidden behind high hedges. Flagstones formed a perfect ring, worn smooth by centuries of use. Cassian wants you able to defend yourself. I agree, though, for different reasons. He tossed her one of the staffs. She caught it clumsily. You think I'll need to fight him, she said. Marcus's expression grew serious. I think that bond between you is new and unpredictable. I think my lord is under tremendous pressure and half mad with grief over his father, and I think you're brave but untrained, which makes you a liability. He raised his staff. So yes, you need to know how to fight. Even allies can become threats when desperation takes hold. They began with basic stance, grip, how to read an opponent's movement. Marcus was patient but demanding, correcting her posture with taps of his staff that left bruises she'd feel tomorrow. Alara quickly learned he'd been a soldier before his turning, and his teaching style reflected it. Vampires are faster than you, he explained as they circled each other. Stronger, more experienced. You'll never win through force. Your advantages are creativity and the fact that most vampires underestimate mortals. Comforting. It should be. Underestimation is a weapon if you know how to use it. He lunged. She barely parried, the impact jarring her arms. We're also bound by rules. You're not. A vampire can't enter a home uninvited, can't cross running water without discomfort, can't tolerate direct sunlight for long. What about the wooden stake through the heart? Works on anything if you're strong enough to pierce the ribcage. We just happen to be harder to pin down. He struck again, faster this time. She stumbled backward. But certain woods do cause us pain. Hawthorn, rowan, ash. A dagger made from the right tree can level the field. They trained until sweat soaked through Alara's blouse and her hands blistered on the staff. Finally, Marcus called a halt, tossing her a water skin. You're better than I expected, he admitted. Fast learner. Had good motivation. She drank deeply, then asked the question that had been nagging at her. Why do you stay? If the house is doomed, why not flee like the others? Marcus was quiet, his gaze distant. Cassian's father saved me. 200 years ago, I was a newly turned vampire, half feral with bloodlust. House Corvus had made me as a soldier, then abandoned me when I proved too difficult to control. I would have killed dozens, maybe hundreds, before someone put me down. He looked at her. Victor Nocturne found me, taught me control, gave me purpose. He showed me that what we are doesn't define what we choose to become. And Cassian is his father's son in every way that matters, brilliant, stubborn, too noble for his own good. A sad smile crossed Marcus's face. He'll die for this house if necessary. I won't let him die alone. Before Alara could respond, she felt it, a spike of alarm through the bond, sharp as broken glass. Her hand flew to her chest, gasping, "What is it?" Marcus was at her side instantly. "Cassian, something's wrong." They ran. Through the garden, across the marble entrance hall, up the grand staircase. The pole led her west, to a wing she hadn't yet explored. Marcus burst through a heavy door into chambers that could only be Cassian's. The room was chaos. Furniture overturned, papers scattered across the floor, and in the center of it all, Cassian knelt among shattered glass, his hands bleeding where he'd clearly punched through a mirror. "Get out," he snarled, not looking up. "My lord," Marcus began. "I said leave," but Alara didn't move. The bond thrummed with his anguish raw, overwhelming, the kind of pain that had no outlet but destruction. She understood it. That desperate need to break something external because the internal breaking was too terrible to face. "Marcus, give us a moment," she said quietly. "Miss Thorne, I don't think. Please." Marcus hesitated, then withdrew, closing the door softly. Alara approached Cassian carefully, as one might approach a wounded animal. Blood dripped from his hands onto the floor, impossibly dark, pooling in the cracks between floorboards. "You shouldn't be here," Cassian said, his voice hoarse. "The bond disagrees." Damn the bond. But there was no heat in it. He stared at his bleeding hands as if they belonged to someone else. "I found his journal, my father's, hidden in the wall safe. His last entry was the night he disappeared." Alara knelt beside him, glass crunching under her knees. What did it say? That he knew they were coming for him, that he'd uncovered proof of a conspiracy reaching into the council itself. Cassian's jaw clenched. He knew, and he faced them anyway because he believed the truth mattered more than his life. "Then we find that proof. We finish what he started." He finally looked at her, and the devastation in his eyes stole her breath. "Why do you care? This isn't your fight. You made it my fight when you bound me to your house." She reached out slowly, carefully taking one of his bleeding hands in hers. The blood was warm, almost hot, and maybe I'm tired of running from everything. Maybe I want to stand for something, even if it's terrifying. Cassian stared at their joined hands, at the way her mortal skin looked so fragile against his pale, immortal flesh. "You'll get hurt. Probably. But I'm already hurt. At least this way it might mean something." For a long moment, neither spoke. Then Cassian's fingers closed gently around hers, not possessive, not claiming, but seeking. The bond between them settled, the anguish easing to something more bearable. "I don't know how to do this," he admitted. "Lead a dying house. Fight a war I'm losing. Trust someone new when everyone else has fled. Then we figure it out together." She squeezed his hand. That's what bonds are for, right? Sharing the weight. Something shifted in his expression, surprise, perhaps gratitude. The first crack in the armor he wore. "You're either very brave or very foolish. Can't I be both?" This time when he smiled, it reached his eyes. Chapter 6. Secrets in the Archives. The journal lay open on the library table between them, its pages yellowed with age, but the handwriting still sharp and precise. Victor Nocturne's final words, written hours before he vanished. They meet in the catacombs beneath St. Erasmus Cathedral. I've traced the payment's blood coin moving from House Solus, Corvus, and Sanguine to someone on the council itself. A conspiracy to overturn the consent laws and return to the old ways. I must have proof before making accusations. If I don't return, Cassian trust no one. The rot goes deeper than we feared. Alara read the passage for the third time, her finger tracing the desperate slant of the final sentences. Cassian stood at the window despite the fading daylight, his bandaged hands clasped behind his back. Marcus had cleaned and wrapped them while Alara fetched the journal, but vampire healing was slow during day hours. "The catacombs," she said. "Have you searched them?" "Thoroughly. Whatever evidence my father found, it's not there now." Frustration threaded through Cassian's voice. Either they moved it, or he hid it somewhere else. "What about this?" Alara pointed to a symbol sketched in the margin, a circle bisected by 3 lines. "It appears on several pages. Does it mean something?" Cassian turned, studied the mark. His expression shifted to recognition. "That's my father's shorthand for the archives, the vault beneath this house where we keep our most sensitive documents. You have a vault and you didn't search it?" "I did. There was nothing unusual." But doubt flickered across his face. Though my father was clever about hiding things in plain sight, he always said the best secrets are the ones people see without recognizing. They descended into the bowels of House Nocturne, down stone stairs that grew colder with each step. The archives occupied a chamber that predated the house itself, ancient stone, walls covered in carved wards that pulsed faintly with protective magic. Shelves lined every surface, packed with leather-bound ledgers, sealed scrolls, and wooden boxes marked with crests Alara didn't recognize. "What exactly are we looking for?" she asked, her breath misting in the frigid air. "I don't know. Something that references the symbol, perhaps, or documents my father accessed in his final days." Cassian moved to a section of financial records, pulling volumes at random. "Start with the recent acquisitions, anything dated within 6 months of his disappearance." They worked in silence for over an hour. Alara's fingers grew numb handling cold parchment, her eyes straining in the lamplight. She found property deeds, contracts for blood shipments from willing donors, correspondence with other houses from more peaceful times. Nothing that suggested conspiracy or murder. "This is useless," Cassian muttered, slamming a ledger shut with enough force to send dust swirling. He wouldn't have left something important where anyone could find it. Then maybe he didn't leave it in the obvious places. Alara studied the chamber, trying to think like a man who knew he was being hunted. If you wanted to hide proof of a conspiracy, where would you put it? Somewhere enemies wouldn't think to look, but someone who knew you well might guess. Cassian's gaze swept the archives, considering. Then his eyes locked on something, a portrait hanging on the far wall. His mother, beautiful and sad-eyed, holding an infant that must have been Cassian himself. He always said she was his conscience, Cassian murmured, moving toward the painting, that when he struggled with difficult decisions, he'd look at her portrait and remember what he was fighting for. He lifted the heavy frame from the wall. Behind it, carved into the stone, was the same 3-line symbol from the journal. "Stand back," Cassian ordered. Alara retreated as he pressed his palm against the symbol. The mark flared with silver light, and a section of stone swung inward with a grinding sound that echoed through the chamber. Beyond lay a narrow passage, pitch dark and smelling of earth and old magic. Cassian grabbed a lamp and entered without hesitation. Alara followed, her heart hammering. The passage descended sharply, the walls pressing close, until it opened into a small chamber no larger than a closet. Inside sat a single iron box. Cassian knelt before it, his hands trembling slightly as he opened the lid. Inside were documents, dozens of them, bound with red ribbon. He lifted the first bundle, scanning the contents by lamplight. "Blood coin transfer records," he breathed. "From House Solis to council member Thaddeus Morn. 50,000 gold paid monthly for 2 years. Who's Thaddeus Morn? Head of the Council of Night, the one who's supposed to be impartial, who arbitrates disputes between houses." Cassian's voice turned bitter. "The one who declared my father a murderer without trial. He pulled out another document, a contract, written in the formal language of vampire law. Alara read over his shoulder, struggling to parse the archaic terms. "This is an agreement to overturn the consent laws," she said slowly. "Signed by representatives from 5 houses. If this is real, it proves my father was right, that the council itself is compromised." Cassian shuffled through more papers, meeting minutes, encrypted correspondence, a map marking feeding territories that would be redistributed once the laws fell. This is enough to bring charges before the High Court. Enough to clear his name, if we can get it there alive. The reality settled over them like a shroud. They had the proof, but carrying it through a city filled with enemies would be suicide. And if the council was corrupted, who could they trust to act on it? "There's one more thing," Cassian said quietly. He held up a letter, unsealed, addressed in his father's hand. "For Cassian, if the worst comes to pass." His hands shook as he unfolded it. Alara watched his face as he read, watched grief give way to shock, then to something harder. Determination. What does it say? That he loved me, that he was proud of the man I'd become. Cassian's voice was rough. "And that if I'm reading this, he's dead. Killed by the council he served. He wants me to take this evidence to the High Court in the capital, even knowing it might cost me everything. Then we go to the capital." "We?" He looked at her sharply. "Alara, this is beyond what you agreed to. I won't force you. You're not forcing me. I'm choosing." She met his gaze steadily. "Your father fought to protect mortals like me. The least I can do is help prove he was right." Something passed between them, understanding, respect, the first threads of genuine trust. The bond hummed with it, warm and certain. "It's a 3-day journey," Cassian warned. "Through territory held by hostile houses. They'll hunt us." "Let them." Alara's jaw set. "We have truth on our side. That has to count for something." Chapter 7. The Siege. They had 2 hours to prepare before the attack came. Marcus insisted on traveling light, a single bag of provisions for Alara. The iron box of evidence secured in a leather satchel, Cassian wore across his chest. Weapons, too. A hawthorn dagger for her, steel blades for the vampires. They planned to leave at midnight, using darkness as cover. They never made it to the gate. Alara was in her room, changing into traveling clothes when the first explosion shattered the night. The house shuddered, plaster raining from the ceiling. She grabbed her bag and ran for the stairs, nearly colliding with Marcus. "They've breached the eastern wall," he shouted over a second explosion. "Dozens of them. House Solis, maybe others." "Where's Cassian?" "Library, securing the evidence. We need to." The front doors exploded inward. Vampires in silver armor poured through like a flood, their movements inhumanly coordinated. Alara caught a glimpse of Seraphine at their center, her white gold hair streaming behind her like a banner. "Find Cassian Nocturne," Seraphine commanded. "Kill anyone who interferes." Marcus shoved Alara toward the servants' passage. "Go, get to the library, bar the doors. I'll hold them. You can't fight them all. I don't need to fight them all. Just slow them down." He drew his curved blade and something ancient and terrible crossed his face. "Go," Alara ran. Behind her, she heard Marcus roar a challenge. Heard the clash of steel and the screams of vampires who'd underestimated a warrior twice their age. The bond pulled her west, toward Cassian, a lifeline in the chaos. She burst into the library to find him shoving books into the fireplace, flames already consuming centuries of knowledge. "What are you doing?" "Destroying anything they might use against us." He grabbed the satchel of evidence, thrust it at her. "Take this. There's a passage behind the Shakespeare collection. It leads to the catacombs beneath the house. Follow them north until you reach the old cemetery. Wait for me there. I'm not leaving you." "Alara, no." She gripped the satchel but held her ground. "We do this together or not at all. That's what the bond means, remember?" Fury and fear warred in his expression. Then the library doors splintered. 4 vampires rushed in, fangs bared, murder in their eyes. Cassian moved like lightning, meeting them with a violence that stole Alara's breath. He fought with brutal efficiency, No wasted motion, every strike calculated to maim or kill. But there were too many. A vampire flanked him, claws extended. Alara didn't think. She pulled the hawthorn dagger from her belt and threw. The blade caught the vampire in the shoulder. He screamed a sound of genuine agony as the sacred wood burned his flesh. Cassian used the distraction to snap the vampire's neck. "Behind you!" Alara spun. A female vampire lunged at her, too fast to dodge. She braced for impact. But Cassian was there, pulling her aside, taking the vampire's claws across his chest instead. Blood bloomed across his shirt. Black in the firelight. The bond exploded with his pain. Alara gasped, staggering, feeling the tearing sensation as if her own flesh had been ripped. But instead of paralyzing her, it focused her. She grabbed a burning log from the fireplace and swung it at the female vampire's face. The vampire shrieked, stumbling back. Cassian finished her with a thrust through the heart. "The passage," he growled, clutching his bleeding chest. "Now." They ran. Cassian pulled aside a section of shelving to reveal a narrow opening in the wall. Alara squeezed through, the satchel clutched tight, and Cassian followed, dragging the shelving closed behind them. The sounds of fighting faded as they descended into darkness. The passage was barely wide enough for Cassian's shoulders, the air thick with the smell of earth and decay. Alara felt her way forward, one hand on the rough stone wall, the other gripping the satchel. Behind her, she could hear Cassian's labored breathing. "You're hurt," she said. "I'll heal. Keep moving." But the bond told her different. She felt his weakness, the way vampire bodies diverted energy to healing during crisis, leaving them vulnerable. He needed blood to recover properly. Blood he wouldn't take until the full moon, still days away, unless she offered. The thought made her stomach clench, but she pushed it aside. Survival first, ethics later. The passage opened into the catacombs, a vast network of tunnels lined with ancient tombs. Skulls grinned from niches in the walls, and the air was cold enough to freeze her breath. Cassian leaned against the wall, his face gray with pain. "Which way?" Alara asked. He pointed north with a trembling hand. "Stay close. These tunnels connect to the old city. We can lose them here, but it's easy to get turned around." They moved through the darkness, Cassian's pace growing slower. Twice, Alara had to support him when he stumbled. The bond pulsed with his deteriorating condition, pain, weakness, the slow drain of vampire vitality. "You need blood," she said finally. "I'll manage. You're barely standing. If they catch us like this, I won't take from you before the agreed time. I gave my word." Stubborn, noble fool. Alara stopped walking, forcing him to halt as well. In the darkness, she could barely see his face, but she felt him through the bond, his determination, his fear for her safety, his absolute refusal to break the terms of their agreement even if it killed him. "What if I offer freely?" she asked. "Not because of the bond or the contract, because we need you strong enough to survive." "Alara, is it allowed? Can I consent to change the terms?" He was silent. "Then, yes, but you don't understand what you're asking. The act of feeding, it's intimate, invasive. You'll feel everything I feel, and I'll taste everything you are. There's no going back from that." "I know." And she did in the deep place where the bond lived. "But we need to survive, and I trust you not to take more than necessary." Cassian's hand found hers in the darkness, his fingers ice cold. "You shouldn't trust me. You barely know me. The bond knows you, and that's enough." She felt him waver, need warring with honor. Finally, he drew her closer, his other hand coming up to cup her face with surprising gentleness. "This will hurt," he whispered. "I know." His fangs pierced her throat. Chapter 8. The taste of trust, pain, sharp and immediate, like fire and ice colliding beneath her skin. Alara's fingers dug into Cassian's shoulders, a cry strangling in her throat. But then the pain shifted, transformed into something else entirely. Warmth flooded through her veins, not the warmth of blood leaving her body, but something deeper, a connection that made the bond feel like a pale shadow of what it could be. She felt Cassian's relief as her blood touched his tongue, the way it spread through him like liquid light, knitting torn flesh and restoring strength. And he felt her. Everything, the fear she'd been holding back, the loneliness that had defined her life long before the debts came calling, the desperate hope that maybe, impossibly, she'd finally found somewhere she belonged. The intimacy was staggering. Easy, his voice whispered through the bond, though his lips never left her throat. I've got you. Almost done. True to his word, he withdrew after mere seconds, far sooner than he needed to. She sensed through their connection. His tongue swept across the puncture wounds, and vampire saliva sealed them instantly, leaving only a faint tingling warmth. Cassian stepped back, releasing her carefully. In the darkness, his eyes caught what little light existed, reflecting it back like a cat's. His color had returned, the gray pallor replaced by vitality. The wounds on his chest had closed to angry red lines that would fade within the hour. Thank you, he said quietly. Alara touched her throat, feeling the smooth skin where his fangs had been. That was not what I expected. I took less than I should have. You'll be weak for a few hours, dizzy perhaps, but you'll recover. He turned away, but not before she caught the shame in his expression. I'm sorry you had to. Don't. She grabbed his arm, forcing him to face her. Don't apologize for surviving. I offered. You accepted. That's how consent works. You don't understand what I tasted, what I know about you now. Then tell me what you learned. He was silent for a long moment, struggling with something. When he spoke, his voice was raw. That you're lonely, that you've spent your whole life feeling like you don't quite fit anywhere, that your grandmother was kind but distant, and you loved her anyway, that you're terrified of being forgotten, of leaving no mark on the world. His eyes met hers, and that despite everything, the fear, the danger, the absolute insanity of this situation, some part of you feels more alive now than you have in years. The accuracy of it stole her breath. That's invasive. I warned you. What did I taste like? The question escaped before she could stop it. Cassian's expression shifted surprise, then something heated and dangerous, like starlight and stubbornness, like someone who's been told they're ordinary their whole life but never believed it. He stepped closer, and she could feel the warmth radiating from him now, her blood bringing him back to something resembling life. Like hope, which is the rarest flavor I've encountered in 2 centuries. The air between them thickened. Alara became acutely aware of how close they stood, of the way his gaze had dropped to her lips before jerking away. We should keep moving, he said roughly. Right. Yes. She clutched the satchel tighter, using it as armor against whatever had just passed between them. North, you said? They walked in charged silence, the catacombs stretching endlessly. The bond hummed between them, no longer just a thread but something richer, layered with new understanding. Alara could feel Cassian's heightened awareness of her, the way he tracked her footsteps, adjusted his pace to match hers, noticed when she shivered in the cold. Here, he said, shrugging out of his coat and draping it over her shoulders before she could protest. It smelled of night air and old books and something uniquely him. You don't get cold? Not the same way mortals do. Temperature is more theoretical for us. He guided her around a collapsed section of tunnel. Your blood helped more than I expected. I should be able to fight if they catch up to us. Will they? Catch up, I mean. Seraphine is nothing if not persistent. She'll have vampires searching every tunnel within the hour. His jaw tightened. But these catacombs are extensive. If we're careful, we can reach the cemetery and slip away before dawn. They emerged into a larger chamber where ancient crypts lined the walls like silent sentinels. Alara's foot caught on something, a rusted chain attached to a skeleton slumped against the wall. She stumbled, and Cassian caught her instantly. Careful. This section dates back to the plague years. The city buried thousands down here and forgot about them. Cheerful. But she didn't pull away from his steadying grip. How much farther? Another half-mile, then up through the old chapel. He paused, head tilting. Someone's following us. Alara heard it too, yet soft scuff of footsteps echoing through the tunnels behind them, not the heavy tread of armored warriors, but something lighter. Stealthier. Cassian pushed her behind him. drawing his blade. "Stay back." A figure emerged from the shadows. Not a vampire warrior, but a woman in tattered servant's clothes, her face gaunt with hunger. She raised her hands in surrender. "Please, Lord Nocturne, I mean no harm." "Greta?" Cassian lowered his blade slightly. "I thought you'd fled with the others." "I tried to leave, but House Solis had vampires watching the roads. They caught me, brought me back to the estate." She moved closer, and Alara saw bruises darkening her throat. "They're using the staff as hostages. Anyone who served House Nocturne is leverage against you." Fury rolled through the bond. "How many?" "8, that I know of. Locked in the wine cellar under guard." Greta's eyes were desperate. "Lady Seraphine said she'll kill one every day you refuse to surrender." Cassian's expression went cold and deadly. "She's trying to force my hand, make me choose between the evidence and innocent lives." "What do we do?" Alara asked. "You keep going to the capital with the evidence. I go back for the hostages. That's suicide. That's responsibility." He thrust the satchel into her hands. "Get this to the High Court, tell them everything. If I don't survive, at least my father's death won't be for nothing." "No." Alara's voice came out stronger than she felt. "We're not separating. There has to be another way. There isn't time. Then we make time." She turned to Greta. "How many guards in the wine cellar?" 4, maybe 5, but they're trained warriors. We can't. We don't fight them directly." Alara's mind raced, pulling together fragments from the books she'd read, the training with Marcus, the layout of House Nocturne she'd memorized. "Cassian, the catacombs connect to your wine cellar, don't they? You said these tunnels link to the old city." Understanding dawned in his eyes. "There's an access tunnel, sealed 50 years ago, but the door might still open from this side. Then we go in quietly, get the hostages out through the tunnels, and they can't use them against you." She met his gaze. "After that, we run for the capital together." Greta looked between them. "That's insane." "Probably," Alara agreed, "but we're doing it anyway." Cassian studied her for a long moment, something like admiration warming his expression. Then he smiled fierce and genuine. "All right, Alara Thorne, let's go save some lives." Chapter 9. Blood and Starlight. The sealed tunnel was everything Alara feared: narrow, crumbling, choked with debris that had accumulated over half a century. Cassian moved ahead, clearing rubble with inhuman strength, while Greta and Alara followed in tense silence. The sounds of their passage seemed deafening in the confined space. Through the bond, Alara felt Cassian's focused determination, layered beneath with something darker. Guilt. He blamed himself for every servant captured, every life Seraphine threatened. "This isn't your fault," she whispered. "He didn't turn around. They served my house. That makes them my responsibility. They chose to serve, just like I chose to help tonight. You didn't choose this war. Neither did you. Your father started this fight because it was right. You're finishing it for the same reason." She touched his shoulder, felt him still beneath her hand. "That's not guilt. That's honor." His hand covered hers briefly, wordless acknowledgement before he returned to clearing the path. 20 minutes later, they reached the sealed door, ancient iron green with corrosion, but the locking mechanism still intact. Cassian examined it, then pulled a set of picks from his boot. "My father taught me these tunnels as a boy, said every nocturne should know the house's secrets." His voice softened. "He was preparing me for this, even then, preparing me to survive when he couldn't." The lock clicked open with surprising ease. Beyond lay the wine cellar racks of bottles stretching into shadow, and at the far end, a huddled group of mortals watched by 3 vampire guards in Solis colors. 3, not 4, Cassian murmured. "Better odds." "Still suicide if they raise the alarm," Greta breathed. "Then we don't let them." Alara studied the layout, her mind working through possibilities. "Greta, can you mimic being under duress? Cry out, draw one away?" "I'm a servant, not an actress. You're a survivor who's been through hell tonight. That's not acting." Alara met her eyes. "We need them separated. Can you do it?" After a moment, Greta nodded. They positioned themselves in the shadows near the tunnel entrance. Greta stumbled forward, letting out a convincing sob. "Please, someone help. I'm lost." One guard broke away immediately, approaching with predatory interest. Well, well, another rabbit for the warren. Cassian struck from behind swift, brutal, silent. The vampire crumpled before he could scream. Cassian lowered the body carefully, then gestured for the next phase. Alara grabbed a wine bottle and threw it. Glass shattered against the far wall. Both remaining guards turned toward the sound and Cassian moved like smoke. He tipped down the second guard while Alara rushed to the hostages. "Quiet," she hissed, fumbling with their restraints. "We're getting you out." But the third guard was faster than anticipated. He dodged Cassian's attack and let out a piercing whistle in alarm that echoed through the house like a death knell. "Go!" Cassian shouted. "Get them to the tunnels." Alara and Greta herded the 8 hostages toward the hidden door. Most moved quickly, fear overriding confusion, but one, an elderly man who'd served House Nocturne for decades, stumbled. Alara caught him as footsteps thundered overhead. Cassian dispatched the third guard, then turned to face the cellar stairs. "Alara, run, now. Not without you. I'll hold them off and follow. You have to." Seraphine descended the stairs like an avenging angel, 6 warriors at her back. Her eyes found Cassian, then Alara, and her smile was winter cruel. How touching. The lordling and his pet mortal playing hero. She gestured lazily. "Kill them both. Make it hurt." The warriors surged forward. Cassian met them with a fury Alara felt through the bond, desperate, protective, magnificent. He fought like a man with nothing left to lose, every move calculated to buy seconds for the hostages to escape. But 6 against 1, even for a vampire of his skill, was impossible. A blade caught his side, then another across his back. He staggered and panic flooded the bond so sharply Alara cried out. She couldn't watch him die. Wouldn't. The hawthorn dagger was in her hand before thought caught up to instinct. She threw herself forward, slashing at the nearest warrior. The sacred wood burned vampire flesh, and her target screamed. Cassian used the distraction to regain his footing, fighting his way back to her side. "What are you doing?" he snarled. "What you do for me. Fighting." They stood back to back, mortal and vampire against impossible odds. The bond sang between them, no longer just connection but partnership, each anticipating the other's movements. When Cassian fainted left, Alara struck right. When she stumbled, he steadied her without looking. But it wasn't enough. A warrior's blade sliced across Alara's arm. Pain exploded through the bond, and Cassian roared. His control shattered, not into mindless rage, but something colder. More ancient. The predator beneath the gentleman's mask finally unleashed. He moved faster than Alara's eyes could track, tearing through warriors with claws and fangs. 2 went down before the others realized what had happened. Seraphine's expression shifted from amusement to concern. "Retreat," she commanded. But Cassian was beyond hearing. He caught a third warrior, and for a terrible moment, Alara thought he'd kill them all in front of her. Then his eyes found hers wild, barely human. And something in her gaze reached him. "Come back," she thought desperately through the bond. "I need you here. Not lost to this." He shuddered, releasing the warrior who scrambled back to Seraphine's side. The predator receded slowly, leaving Cassian breathing hard, blood his and others staining his hands. Seraphine studied them both, calculation replacing fury. "Interesting. The bond runs deeper than I thought," she smiled. "This isn't over, Cassian. You've won a battle, not the war. And next time, I'll kill her first, just to watch you break." She retreated up the stairs, her remaining warriors following. Their footsteps faded, leaving terrible silence. Cassian turned to Alara, and she saw the horror in his eyes. "I almost, if you hadn't stopped me, but I did." She caught his face between her hands, forcing him to focus. "You came back. That's what matters. I could have hurt you, lost control, and you didn't. The bond held." She pressed her forehead to his. "We held each other." Behind them, Greta cleared her throat softly. "My lord, the hostages are safe in the tunnels. But we should move before they return with reinforcements." Cassian nodded shakily, pulling away from Alara. They retrieved the satchel and fled into the catacombs, the freed hostages ahead of them. As they ran through the darkness, Alara felt the bond settling into something new. Not just connection or partnership, but the first fragile threads of something that terrified her more than any vampire attack. Trust that was becoming devotion. Partnership that was becoming something deeper. Outside, through cemetery gates and into the forest beyond, they finally stopped to catch their breath. Dawn painted the eastern sky pale gold. Cassian stared at the light with an expression of longing so profound it hurt to witness. "What happens now?" Alara asked. "Now we run. 3 days to the capital with every hostile house hunting us." He looked at her, and despite the exhaustion and blood and terror, he smiled. "Think you can keep up, Alara Thorne?" She smiled back, fierce and certain. "Try to lose me, Cassian Nocturne." Together they disappeared into the trees as the sun rose over a city at war. Chapter 10. The Choice. 3 days of running had worn them to shadows of themselves. They'd traveled through forests thick with ancient trees, forded rivers that made Cassian hiss with discomfort, and hidden in abandoned cottages while hostile vampires searched mere yards away. The hostages had scattered to safe houses along the way, Greta guiding them to relatives who'd shelter them until the war ended, one way or another. Now, as twilight fell on the third evening, the capital rose before them like a promise. Spires of white stone reached toward the darkening sky, and the High Court's fortress dominated the city's hardest structure, so old it predated vampire memory. Built when the first accords between mortals and immortals were forged. "We made it," Alara breathed, hardly daring to believe. Cassian's hand found hers, squeezing gently. The casual intimacy of the gesture no longer surprised her. 3 days of survival had stripped away pretense, leaving only truth. They'd shared blood twice more, once when he'd been wounded by silver weapons, once when she'd grown too weak to continue. Each feeding had deepened the bond until she could feel his presence like a second heartbeat. "The hard part comes next," he said, "convincing the High Court to hear us." They entered the city as dusk deepened to night. The capital was nothing like the shadowed streets of home here. Vampires and mortals moved together openly. Street vendors sold blood wine alongside regular fare. Mortals wore medallions indicating their donor status, and vampires displayed crests showing which houses they served. This was what Victor Nocturne had fought for. A world where both species coexisted without predation or fear. "It's beautiful," Alara whispered. "It's a lie." Cassian's voice was bitter. "This only exists because the Council enforces the consent laws. If Seraphine and her allies succeed in overturning them, all of this ends. The capital becomes like every other city, hunting grounds for monsters." They approached the High Court as the moon rose. Guards in pristine white armor flanked the entrance, both vampire and mortal, working in pairs. One of them, a stern-faced woman with silver hair, raised her hand. "State your business." "I am Cassian Nocturne, heir to House Nocturne. I carry evidence of conspiracy within the Council of Night and request an emergency tribunal." The guards exchanged glances. "House Nocturne is under investigation for..." "I know what we're accused of. This evidence proves those accusations were manufactured." Cassian pulled the satchel forward. "I invoke the right of truth. By ancient law, the High Court must hear me." The silver-haired guard studied him, then nodded slowly. "Wait here." She disappeared inside. Minutes stretched like hours. Alara felt Cassian's tension through the bond. This was everything. If the High Court refused them, if the conspiracy reached even here, then Victor Nocturne's sacrifice meant nothing. The guard returned with an elderly vampire whose presence radiated authority. His robes were marked with symbols of the High Court, and his eyes held the weight of millennia. "I am Justice Aldrich Thane. You claim to have evidence of conspiracy?" "Yes, Your Honor. Documents proving that Council member Thaddeus Morn accepted bribes to overturn the consent laws and that my father was murdered to silence his investigation." Aldrich's expression remained neutral, but something flickered in his ancient eyes. "These are grave accusations. If you're lying, then execute me for wasting the court's time. But look at the evidence first. Cassian handed over the satchel. Everything is there. Transfer records, signed agreements, my father's journal documenting his investigation. The truth, my house was destroyed to hide. Aldrich opened the satchel, scanning the documents with preternatural speed. His face remained impassive, but Alara saw his hands tighten on the papers. This will require verification. The tribunal will convene tomorrow at sunset. He looked at Cassian. You'll be held in protective custody until then, both of you. She's not part of this, Cassian said quickly. She's bound to my service, but the conspiracy, she traveled with you for 3 days, helped you escape hostile territory, and stands at your side now. Aldrich's gaze softened slightly. She's part of this whether you wish it or not. We'll keep you both safe. They were led to chambers deep within the fortress, comfortable but clearly secured. 2 rooms connected by a sitting area, guards posted outside. As the door closed behind them, Alara finally let herself collapse onto a velvet sofa. We did it, she said. We actually did it. Cassian stood at the window, staring out at the city. The tribunal could still reject the evidence. Morn has allies in the High Court. If enough of them are compromised, then we've lost nothing. We were losing anyway. Alara joined him at the window. But if they accept it, if your father's name is cleared, then maybe his death meant something. Cassian's reflection in the glass looked haunted. Maybe the world he dreamed of can still exist. They stood in silence, watching the city below. The bond hummed between them, carrying exhaustion and hope in equal measure. Finally, Cassian turned to face her. After tomorrow, if we survive the tribunal, our agreement ends. 10 years compressed into 3 days of service. No one could argue you haven't fulfilled your oath. Alara's heart clenched. You're releasing me from the bond? I'm offering you a choice. Stay bound to a house that may not survive the week, or take your freedom and build the life you wanted before all this began. His eyes searched hers. You deserve that choice, Alara. You've earned it 100 times over. She should have felt relief. Freedom was what she'd wanted from the beginning, escape from debt, from obligation, from the crushing weight of a life she'd never chosen. But standing here, feeling Cassian through the bond, remembering the way they'd fought side by side, the intimacy of blood shared in desperate moments, the trust that had grown between predator and prey until those words no longer fit freedom, felt like loss. What if I don't want to choose? She asked softly. You have to. I won't keep you bound out of convenience, or... He stopped, jaw tightening. Or selfishness. Is it selfish to want partnership? To want. She stepped closer, heart hammering. To want more than an obligation between us? Cassian went utterly still. Alara, you can't mean. I mean that 3 days ago you were a vampire who'd purchased my service. Now you're the man who taught me I could be brave, who trusted me with his father's legacy, who came back from the edge of losing control because I asked you to. She touched the scar on her palm, silver against mortal skin. The bond doesn't feel like a chain anymore. It feels like coming home. You don't understand what you're saying. The bond can influence emotions, make you feel things that aren't real. Don't. She caught his face, forcing him to meet her eyes. Don't diminish this. I know my own heart, and I know you feel it too. His control cracked. Of course I feel it. Your starlight and courage and everything I thought I'd forgotten how to want. But you're mortal, Alara. You'll age and die while I remain unchanged. That's not partnership, that's slow torture. Then offer me what your father offered mortals who chose to stay, the gift he believed in. Her voice steadied. Make me like you. Let me choose immortality, not as property, but as an equal. Cassian's eyes widened with shock. You can't. The transformation is agony. You'd lose your mortality, your humanity. I'd lose my limitations, and I'd gain centuries to stand beside you. She smiled. Isn't that what your father fought for? Choice? Let me make mine. He pulled her close, his forehead resting against hers. Through the bond, She felt his longing war with his fear of losing her, of failing her, of loving her and watching time steal her away. "Ask me again after the tribunal," he whispered, "when you know if House Nocturne survives, when you've had time to think without danger clouding your judgment. And if I still choose you?" His smile was painful and beautiful. "Then I'll spend eternity proving you weren't wrong to trust a monster." "You're not a monster, Cassian Nocturne." "No," he agreed softly. "Not anymore. You won't let me be." They stood wrapped together as night deepened, the bond singing between them, no longer master and servant, predator and prey, but two souls who'd found each other in darkness and refused to let go. Tomorrow would bring the tribunal, judgment, perhaps war. Tonight, they had each other. And that, Alara thought, was enough. Epilogue. Dawn of the new house. 6 months had passed since the tribunal. Alara stood at the window of what had once been Victor Nocturne's study, now hers and Cassian's shared office, watching the sun set over a city transformed. The High Court's judgment had been swift and brutal. Thaddeus Morn stripped of his position and executed for treason, 3 other council members imprisoned, and the consent laws not only upheld but strengthened. House Solus had fractured without council protection. Seraphine fled to the borderlands, her warriors scattered. Houses, Corvus and Sanguini sued for peace, unwilling to continue a war they could no longer win. House Nocturne stood vindicated, restored, reborn. "You're thinking too loudly," Cassian said from the doorway, 2 glasses of blood wine in his hands. He'd taken to the habit of joining her for sunset, a ritual that marked the boundary between his dormancy and their shared nights. Just remembering. Alara accepted the glass, the dark liquid glinting in the dying light. 6 months, and she still marveled at how her senses had sharpened colors more vivid, sounds more distinct, the world rendered in clarity mortals could never comprehend. She'd made her choice 3 days after the tribunal. Cassian had asked her 7 times if she was certain, given her a month to reconsider, and finally, when she'd threatened to find another vampire to turn her out of spite, he'd agreed. The transformation had been everything he'd warned and nothing she'd feared. 3 days of agony as her body died and reformed, Cassian never leaving her side, his blood sustaining her through the change. She'd woken on the 4th night to find the world made new, and Cassian's face the first thing her vampire eyes focused on. "Hello, Starlight," he'd whispered through the bond. "Welcome to forever. The new donors arrive tomorrow," Cassian said now, joining her at the window. 20 mortals who volunteered for the program. Marcus has been training them on protocol. Alara nodded. They'd rebuild House Nocturne on Victor's principles: consensual feeding, fair compensation, mortals treated as partners rather than prey. It was slow work, convincing a world used to predation that another way existed. But word was spreading. Other houses were adopting their methods, cautiously at first. Then, with growing conviction, change, like immortality, required patience. "And the girl from House Corvus?" Alara asked. "The one who requested asylum?" "Arrives next week. She's young, newly turned, and her maker was unkind." Cassian's jaw tightened. "She'll be safe here. I've promised her sanctuary and training in controlling her gifts." This was what House Nocturne had become: a refuge for those who wanted to be more than monsters. Vampires who'd been brutalized by the old ways, mortals seeking partnership with immortals. Even a few scholars studying the intersection of human and vampire culture. Their halls, once empty and echoing, now rang with voices and purpose. "Your father would be proud," Alara said softly. "I hope so." Cassian's hand found hers, their matching silver scargers, from the binding, his from when he'd offered his own blood during her transformation, catching the last rays of sunlight. "Though I think he'd be more amused that I fell in love with the woman I bought at a blood auction." "You didn't buy me. You accepted my service." Semantics. His smile was warm. "You've been correcting my word choice for 6 months. I'm starting to think you enjoy it. I enjoy keeping you honest." She leaned into him, marveling at how perfectly they fit together now, 2 immortals bound not by contract or desperation, but by choice renewed every night. Besides, someone has to counter your brooding tendencies. I don't brood. You absolutely brood. Marcus keeps a tally. Cassian laughed, a sound that had become more frequent as the months passed, as the weight of war and grief slowly lifted. The bond between them had evolved beyond anything Alara had imagined. It was partnership and passion, friendship and devotion. A connection so deep that sometimes she couldn't tell where her thoughts ended and his began. The council wants to meet next week, Cassian said, his tone shifting to business. Formally recognize House Nocturne's restoration and discuss expanding the consent laws to other territories. Will you go? We will go. You're co-head of this house now, whether you like the title or not. He turned to face her fully. I meant what I said at the beginning, partnership, not possession. That includes sharing power. Alara had resisted the formal title at first, arguing she was too new, too inexperienced. But Cassian had been immovable. The mortals who came to House Nocturne needed to see one of their own, or rather, one who'd been one of them in a position of authority. A symbol that transformation didn't mean losing yourself, but becoming more. Then we'll go together. She touched his cheek, feeling the cool perfection of vampire skin that had once terrified her. As we do everything now. Forever is a long time to be stuck with someone, he teased, though his eyes were serious. Good thing I chose someone worth being stuck with. He kissed her then, gentle and deep, the kind of kiss that promised centuries of nights like this one. The bond flared between them, carrying love and desire and the profound contentment of two souls who'd found their match in the darkness. When they finally pulled apart, full night had fallen. Through the window, Alara saw lights kindling throughout House Nocturne, mortals and vampires moving through halls that hummed with life instead of decay. In the courtyard, she glimpsed Marcus training a group of young vampires in the discipline their makers had failed to teach. In the library, scholars bent over ancient texts, searching for knowledge lost to time. This was Victor Nocturne's dream made real, a house where consent mattered, where mortals and immortals built something beautiful together, where love could cross the boundaries of mortality without becoming predation. What are you thinking? Cassian asked, following her gaze. That I came to that auction expecting to buy my freedom. Instead, I found something worth being bound to. She smiled at him. No regrets, Cassian Nocturne. Not a single one. Not even when I'm brooding? Especially not then. Someone has to appreciate your dramatic profile against candlelight. His laughter echoed through the study, and Alara felt the bond swell with happiness so pure it ached. She'd been mortal, once lonely, wounded, convinced she'd leave no mark on the world. Now she was immortal, powerful, standing at the center of a revolution that would reshape how vampires and mortals coexisted. But more than that, she was loved. And she loved in return. The rest was just forever. Come, Cassian said, offering his hand. The night is young and we have work to do. Houses to rebuild, laws to reform, a world to change. And after? Alara asked, taking his hand. After, we find our garden. Watch the stars. Remember that even immortals need moments of peace. They walked from the study together, past portraits of Nocturnes long dead, through halls alive with their legacy reborn. Somewhere in the distance, Marcus called out a training command. In the kitchen, mortals and vampires prepared the evening meal together, laughing over shared tasks. House Nocturne had fallen and risen again, stronger for the breaking. And at its heart stood two people who'd found each other in darkness and built a love that would outlast empires. Alara looked back once at the study at Victor's portrait, watching over them with painted eyes that seemed almost proud. Then she turned forward, toward Cassian and the future they'd build together. Forever, she'd learned, wasn't something to fear. It was something to embrace. Together, they stepped into the night, and it welcomed them home.